Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our session on affirming cultural identities through images. My name is Elsa Vie, and I manage the outreach program at the African Studies Center. So our evening tonight is going to follow this broad agenda. I will start with a few remarks to introduce the university, the African Studies Center at the university, and the agenda and the topic for tonight. And then we will turn to Dr. Kisha Tracy's presentation and workshop. And in closing, I will share a resource list and evaluation and links to some of our next events. Just a couple details on our session tonight. Oops, sorry, there. Please mute yourself during the presentation. We are all Zoom adepts now, so I know this is not essential information that you don't know. You're very welcome to keep your camera on if you wish, but this session is being recorded. So if you do not wish your words or your images to be included in the recording, we recommend you not turning on your camera. And if you don't want any words or images included, just to make sure that we document that, please type no privately to me in the chat box. Or you can also email africa@bu.edu to let us know that you wish not to be included in the recording. We do, however, welcome your use of the chat box throughout the afternoon. It's as you know from various events that you probably have attended, it's a really great way to comment while the information is being shared. And you can in situ share your thoughts. So please do not hesitate to add questions, comments, remarks, or anything that comes to mind. And I'm going to now turn to introducing the African Studies Center K-16 education program for those who may attend one of our events for the first time. So the African Studies Center at BU has a public and federally funded mission to promote the study of Africa in K-12 schools, as well as community colleges and MSIs, minority serving institutions. So in this slide, you can see the variety of ways that we address this goal. So on campus, we have a physical library of books and resources. We also have the African Studies Library, which is publicly funded, and therefore you can access some of the resources. Definitely be in touch with me if you would like to access the African Studies Library resources at BU. But in our current world of remote learning, our online curriculum and resources are definitely more useful. I'm going to drop the link to our online resources here, which many of you probably know already, but which might be useful. We in the future, because they're organized by topic, we also organize professional development events as an approved Massachusetts state PD provider. And we run a Teaching Africa certificate for teachers. And I'm really happy to see some of you here who are participating in it. So thanks for attending. So central to our mission is to promote the in-depth study of Africa in ways that center African voices and agency. And that, of course, means an explicit and intentional engagement with culture in the classroom. And so here I want to just raise a couple of points to frame our evening tonight. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when we engage with culture in our classroom, we want to avoid essentialism, which means a narrow set of characteristics. It's not just a set of holidays or recipes or religious traditions or even languages, because culture is a lived experience unique to each and individual student that we teach, who each bring their very unique blend of identities. And of course, these identities are kind of housed in larger sociological groups of race, class, and gender, but they're also housed in their own individual identifications on the basis of their very specific life interests and experiences and their joys and motivations and their struggles. So that's what we mean when we talk about essentialism. We want to avoid narrow definitions of their identities. And as educators, when we use cultural identity, it obviously stimulates the intellectual development of children, and that as many of you know, is supported by brain-based learning tenets and research on social emotional learning. So I'll say this very intentionally. We're missing something if we don't allow students to expand their range of cultural identifications, going beyond the study of countries, right? Which oftentimes happen, especially in elementary school. And another point that I want to raise is this notion of interpolation. Since our students' identities are never set, they're always in action, they're always being played and replayed. So every minute, based on what is influencing them, but also from within, but also from external influences. So we need to ask ourselves both, what do our students currently identify with, and how can we support their existing modes of identification? How can we playfully and creatively expand the range of possibilities of objects and events and places and time periods to identify with from the African continent, but also elsewhere? So because we want to move them to identify with complexity and not narrow-minded scripted versions of their identities. So for all those reasons and the importance of culture in the classroom, I'm so pleased to collaborate with Dr. Kisha Tracy, who offers such a valuable framework for us this afternoon. So I'm very grateful that you're here, Kisha. Dr. Kisha Tracy is Assistant Professor of English at Fitchburg State University. She specializes in pre-modern British and world literatures. She's the co-coordinator of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Fitchburg State and a prolific author of several books on memory, confession, and medievalism. Her research centers on student investment and learning, information literacy, pedagogy in higher education, and she's the review editor for Currents in Teaching and Learning, and is on the board of the New England Faculty Development Consortium. Her interests are wide-ranging, from classical literature, film studies, the American Civil War, European medievalism, but also African and global medievalism. She is the lead designer of an exciting upcoming course on Africans and African medieval cultures, which will be offered via the National Humanities Center later this year. So welcome, Kisha. I'm really thrilled to have you here. And I am going to I'm going to stop my screen share and let you share yours so that, oops, there we go, so that you are able to share your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Elsa. I really want to give a lot of credit to Elsa. I sent an email to her a few years ago, and since then we've just sort of found collaboration after collaboration. So I really want to show my appreciation for the work that she does with all of these things. So I'm going to give you a link in the chat that is to the presentation. You can keep that link, it will be live. And give me 1 second here as I share my screen to start the presentation. All good? All right, excellent. So I am a university professor, but I do always like to start when I'm especially talking to my colleagues in K-12 that I grew up in a teaching family. My mother was a second grade teacher and my father was a high school biology teacher. And so it's very dear to my heart the issues that K-12 instructors deal with and face on a regular basis. And especially right now, you are all heroes as far as I'm concerned, if you're in the teaching profession at all, but especially K-12. So I really hope that things are going well right now and that you are managing with all of the duties that you have to do. So this presentation is going to go in a little bit. We're going to start with a broader focus and then work our way down to the more specific focus for today. So I'm going to ask you to do some things as we move along here, and I would like to ask you right now to put into the chat, what is cultural heritage? What are your ideas about what cultural heritage is? And now I'm trying to find the chat because it doesn't show up on my screen.
There should be a bar somewhere. I can also read you the messages.
Oh, there it is. I found it. It was hiding.
Yeah, it always hides. It's terrible.
Yep. What is cultural heritage? If someone asks you, and I am asking you to define cultural heritage, what do you think it is? It's belonging. Interesting. The first one is very interesting. Assumptions about what we think is normal is an interesting, and it's something that we'll talk about a little bit through here. And valued and exemplary is true. Our roots, belonging to a place, shared sense of belonging, language, traditions, history of people. We have a lot of traditions and values involved here. Very good one by Sarah, generation to generation within a culture, something we'll talk about here in a second too. Ways of knowing, ways of understanding. The shared imagined past. I like that one as a literature person. I like that one a lot. That really brings in a lot of what I do about storytelling and all of that sort of thing. So that's a really excellent one. Excellent. All right. So we can continue to do that. I'm going to give you here the definition from UNESCO. And the first two lines are something that I really want to emphasize is that there is tangible cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage. And the idea of movable heritage, paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, monuments is something we'll talk about definitely later in this presentation. Underwater heritage, shipwrecks. I was just reading today that they want to go down to the Titanic to retrieve the radio, but there's a whole bunch of questions about human remains and how all that's going to be handled. So that all of that idea. Intangible cultural heritage, oral traditions, performing arts, rituals. Interestingly enough, most of what you put into the chat fell into the intangible cultural heritage aspects. And that's something that actually I'm really interested in. I'm also a disability studies scholar, and I'm very interested in invisible disabilities and how do we represent those in cultural heritage spaces, and the idea of intangible cultural heritage and how that might help us be able to do that. This next definition is one that I really enjoy. Cultural heritage is the legacy of physical artifacts and intangible attributes of a group or society that are inherited from past generations, maintained in the present, and bestowed for the benefit of future generations. I really like one that physical and intangible is in there. We have that idea of inherited and generations that you were talking about in the chat, maintained in the present, preserved, preservation is in there, but also that it is bestowed for the future generations because we learn from it. So that definition always kind of sums up for me what cultural heritage may mean. I'm going to show a short video here. This is from our U.S. State Department several years ago, I will qualify, that I think does a nice job of kind of contextualizing it as far as kind of the government approach to cultural heritage. Give me a second.
Ancient and historic sites, cultural objects, and forms of traditional cultural expression enrich our lives. They connect us to our origins and create unique opportunities for the future. Protecting the world's cultural heritage makes society stronger and more secure. Today, many cultural heritage sites and traditions are under threat. This is why the State Department actively works to protect and preserve these irreplaceable resources. Join us in honoring cultural heritage. Together, we can celebrate the world's cultural diversity and ensure that it is preserved for future generations. Learn more about our work to preserve and protect cultural heritage at culturalheritage.state.gov.
I just think it's a really nice little video that kind of encapsulates, especially the idea of the importance of cultural heritage at a state level, which I think is important. But what I'm really interested in particular, are how our students define cultural heritage, which is one of the reasons I asked you at the beginning to define it. I think it's important for students especially to have the time to be able to come to their own conclusions about things. And so this is just an example. The project that I'm going to talk about later in the talk, we did a series of workshops for the Boys and Girls Club, and we did it for a group of middle school age students. And these are just a few of the examples of some of the definitions that they came up with. Cultural heritage is all about where people come from. It's the backbone to a culture, such as how the food is made or how holidays are celebrated. It's how family generation is passed on. Traditions, how traditions influence your culture. And I like this one too. It identifies the country, culture, and the resources that come along with it, which I think they really surprised me with some of the things that they come up with. You know, you kind of expect them to kind of focus in on maybe some specifics, but they were really getting into the larger concept. So I think this is a really excellent exercise with students to be able to feel out what cultural heritage is, as opposed to being told what cultural heritage is. And then, of course, you know, being given some of the official definitions like the UNESCO one. So I'm going to move to the value of cultural heritage. And certainly, as Elsa said earlier, I'm speaking to the choir more than likely here, but I think it does help to contextualize what we're going to be talking about, and also, again, ways to talk about this with our students. One thing I want you to do while I'm doing here is watch for the use and juxtaposition of images in the next sections. So just keep aware of the images as they come through, what they might say to you. You can either pop it into the chat, but I will have a time for us to talk about that in a little bit. So just another little video here. I really enjoy this one as well, because it really gets into the idea of how individuals react to their heritage. So this is from UNESCO.
My childhood memories, the ones that stick out most, would be playing around these really ancient monuments.
It's a legend, you know. You see pictures of the Grand Canyon. You see
terracotta. It was built by the first Chinese emperor, Qin Shi Huang.
There's something they call yodeln. I can't do that. It's just a funny voice they do. I don't know. I cannot do that.
There's something called the Charminar in old city of Hyderabad, and
you have the sun here, which means light up the darkness. Light up the darkness, because in my country also we have a lot of things about like spirits.
Malambo. Guys do one thing and girls we do another things. We dance in couples, and girls we used to do like this, and we dance in a way and another.
I have been there. Oh my God.
By that time it was the empires, the invaders who came and left and went, and Baalbek stayed.
The statue, just the same as the human being, the soldier, the horse, the chariot.
You're sitting there on the canyon and literally like your feet are dangling. You get all of these incredible colors on the canyon and bouncing off the canyon. There's nothing that can prepare you for that.
it's a structure that every Hyderabadi of every thread is proud to say that's a monument that symbolizes the city.
I don't know if you heard about Mamiwata, but you can look up. It's like a big god in the river that protects us and whatever.
All this, it makes Baalbek not a Roman piece or a Greek piece or a Lebanese piece. It makes a place, a site where all the world is there.
قلعة حلب لما فتت علي أول مرة ففتنا على قاعة العرش اللي كان يقعد فيها صلاح الدين. إنه كنت عم ضل نقبي بالمعلمة تبعنا لأنه كنا رايحين مع مدرسة إنه بدي روح أقعد هونيك بدي روح أقعد هونيك وكذا. فهي ما تخليني. هربت وكنت راح أوصل إنه خلص شفت الحلم قدامي راح يتحقق إنه حفوت حقعد. فبيلقطني السكيورتي إنه
I couldn't accept it.
I can't imagine the United States of America without the Grand Canyon. The idea that that would not be there, I mean,
If they said no, there's no more that thing, I mean, it will be a shock, it will be sad.
It would be violence. I would feel violated.
I would think I'm in the wrong movie.
If we destroy the past, that means we will destroy the present and no future.
I can't imagine Lebanon without Baalbek. It exists. It will always be there, I hope.
إنه أنت تشوف تاريخك، تشوف الأماكن الحلوة اللي كنت بتحبها، اللي كنت تزورها، اللي كنت عايش فيها، كلها صارت ولا شيء، ما عادت موجودة. يعني هو صعب بس بدنا نصلحه.
Anybody have any reactions to it? You can either unmute or you can put it into the chat from the video. Visceral feelings about destruction of the past. That one always gets me every time. Kind of that pause after they ask that question when you see the faces of the people. I think it's a very important moment in the video. So yeah, there's the video, I think, again, what I like about that is that it talks about it from the individual perspective, not just as kind of some grand thing, but from an individual for people and how they react to it. And it's very complicated, right? It's not just about your personal thing. It's about how it fits into the grand scheme of your entire culture and your identity and your family's identity, as well as your own. And again, I think visceral is a really, really good word to be able to talk about when it comes to that. So I just want to talk about a few stories. I could talk about stories of cultural heritage, and I could pick them out of, I could pick stories out, and I could be talking here for hours about it, but I'm just going to just tell a few just to get that sense of where we are. I like to start in particular with this gentleman, Khaled Al-Assad, because he kind of started my journey on cultural heritage in my classes. I was looking to redo my world literature class because it's a world literature class that starts from everything from the beginning of time, everywhere in the world, all the way up to the age of exploration, which is impossible to teach. So how to teach that, and I was really struggling with it, really trying to figure that out. And this gentleman, he was a Syrian archaeologist, if you haven't heard from him, who was the head of antiquities for Palmyra in Syria. And ISIS destroyed Palmyra, or destroyed part of it at least, and he was killed by ISIS because he wouldn't give up some of the cultural heritage and the treasures that had been hidden to keep from ISIS, and he was killed. And this happened again in the summer before I was teaching this class again, and it kind of just dawned on me the idea of cultural heritage and how it fits in and explains the significance of why we need to talk about world literature, why we need to study all of these sorts of things. And that's something I'm very interested in, trying to get across to have my students figure out what the significance of what we're studying is. And he kind of started my journey. And so I like to kind of start with it. So this idea that someone would die in order to protect cultural heritage. We can also talk about something like the Monuments Men, which is a World War II organization that they're trying to revive right now. I actually just sat in on a webinar about the Monuments Men and about what they're wanting to do. And this is the group of curators, artists, all kinds of teachers who served on this group, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives section in World War II, to try to recover and protect the cultural heritage that might have been destroyed, or was being destroyed, or hidden, or taken during the war. I always like this particular photo because it's this idea of it's Neuschwanstein Castle in the background. But this idea of them relocating and of evacuating looted art from Neuschwanstein Castle in 1945. So again, this idea that we're working towards protection of cultural heritage. Another one of my favorite examples of soldiers is Tony Clark from World War II. He was ordered to destroy this city. And he had happened to read a book before the war. He had happened to read a book that this painting, The Resurrection, was being kept in this city. And he refused to bomb the city because this painting was there. And he saved this painting, but And it all worked out in the end, but he could have actually been court-martialed for refusing to go against orders. But I find that to be a fascinating topic, this idea of what you would be willing to do to protect something like this painting right here. A big fan. If you haven't read this book, it's a great book. It's also got the best title of a book that's ever been created. The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. It's about the manuscripts that were saved in Timbuktu. And just really the idea of librarians and what they do. And I really, there's the Joshua Hammer who writes this really gives you this sense of all of that they went through of protecting the manuscripts, of manuscripts being put into boats and smuggled down the river to protect them, all of these sorts of things. It's really quite an interesting subject. And then, so the other thing I'll talk about with librarians is the idea of destroyed libraries. I actually added this quotation just this morning because I just found out this book was being published, Burning the Books, A History of the Deliberate Destruction of Knowledge, written by Ovenden, who is the Bodleian librarian in Oxford University. And he talks about that libraries, you know, and this is something that we kind of all know, that they're one of the first things that gets attacked in times of war. How you want to destroy, how do you want to destroy knowledge and cultural heritage and memory? Well, that's, you go to the library and you destroy that first, right? Now, also libraries, and I give you a list of them on here, that the Wikipedia is wonderful for collecting things of this nature, but they also are subject to the elements, right? So, you know, fire, water, these are all very bad for libraries. So they do get destroyed quite frequently. This is one of my favorite memes, as to what you would do with a time machine. Well, I would save the Library of Alexandria. As I often tell my students, if you want to make historians, medievalists, anybody with that ilk cry, bring up the Library of Alexandria, or bring up the Robert Cotton fire in England and almost destroyed the Beowulf manuscript. So these are things to think about, both deliberate and accidental destruction of libraries. I like this book for those of you who teach younger kids. This is a really great book, Hands Around the Library Protecting Egypt's Treasured Books, and this link actually will take you to some readings of it aloud, which is about protecting the new Library of Alexandria, where the people actually linked hands around the library in order to protect it and save it. So it's for younger kids. It's really a fascinating book. We're not the first ones to talk about the loss of cultural heritage, and that's something I do also want to highlight, is that there is a lineage of this. So this is a late 9th century quotation from King Alfred the Great in England, where he's lamenting the fact that churches which had the treasures and the libraries had been burnt by the Vikings in particular. In this case, he was talking about the Viking Age. And again, by far, we're not, again, it's not a modern concept to think about saving heritage or to lament the loss of heritage. So there's a long history that goes along with this. So post your thoughts in the chat. What questions occurred to you during the previous stories? Any questions that came up while you were thinking about those stories? Whose library gets saved? Yes, that's an excellent question. That speaks to issues of power structures. It speaks to issues of colonialism. It speaks to a lot of issues of who decides which ones, and not just libraries, but cultural heritage in general, which ones get saved. So that's a very important question to ask. Not only whose library gets saved, but whose library gets destroyed, right? That would be the other side of it. Any other questions that came up? Well, I have 3 in particular that I wanted to highlight. The first one being is why do people risk their lives to save cultural heritage? And the flip of that question is why destroy cultural heritage? And this is an article by Alberto Fergario, who talks about the fact of that it's psychological warfare, right? That you're to destroy cultural heritage is to destroy the memory, is to destroy the past, is to destroy the connections that exist. And so why do people risk their lives to save it? Well, it's because it's them, right? It's part of who we are. That video really talks about the individual, and again, that moment when they're asked what would happen if that was destroyed, right? It's hard to even imagine what, you know, a piece of cultural heritage that you value that highly, that is so intrinsically a part of who you are and your identity. Well, you might be willing to risk your life to save that, right? You might be willing to put your own life at risk, or at least risk something in your life, like Tony Clark, his career. Are copies the same as the originals? And this was important to me because I'm going to be talking a lot about images, and we're dealing a lot with images here. Why do we create copies? Should we? Digitization is a huge factor right now in thinking about how to preserve cultural heritage, especially manuscripts, or I'm thinking the Notre Dame, when it burned, one of the things that they were really grateful for is that they had a digitization of pretty much the entire cathedral. Right, but is it the same, right? Whenever I give this presentation to younger folks, I will often say, is it the same to go see the Mona Lisa as it is to have a poster of the Mona Lisa in your room, right? Of course, then I had, you know, some wise person who said, well, I've actually seen the Mona Lisa and it's like that big in reality. So maybe it is better to have a poster in your room. So maybe it's not the best example, but is it the difference between holding a manuscript and reading a reproduction, right? And or looking at an image on the screen of the manuscript? What is the difference? And should we create those copies for preservation's sake? And I'll give you this example here. When Palmyra was destroyed, they did a 3D printing of the arch, the famous arch at Palmyra, and they sent it to at first they sent it to, and the image that you have on the left is actually one of my former students, happened to be in London when it was in Trafalgar Square, and she took some pictures for me of the copy that was in Trafalgar Square, and then it went to New York City. Now again, this raises all kinds of questions too about issues of colonialism and issues of white saviorhood to a certain extent, right? The idea of, well, if we're sending this not to the place where it was, but we're sending it off to the West, we're sending it to London, we're sending it to New York City because we're, one, it's good because you're trying to raise funds, you're trying to raise interest in this, but on the other hand, you know, you're trying, is it really appropriate for it to be in those spaces? And this is another question. And again, is the copy the same? Or what power does the copy have whenever we're talking about these things? So very important questions that get raised as far as that, especially again with digitization these days. And this is a question that's very interesting to me, especially again in disability studies scholar. Can cultural heritage both incite and heal trauma? And the answer to that question is yes, for both of them. So this is actually a picture that may be familiar to some of those of you who are in New England or the Massachusetts area. This is in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter, the first kind of wave of the Black Lives Matter protests. The Christopher Columbus statue was beheaded, which I thought was a fascinating feat of engineering, because that is it is a clean cut of his head. I can only try to imagine how somebody did this. It was fascinating to me. But this idea of who are we putting monuments up to, and what does it mean to take them down, right? And I put a phrase here called damnatio memoriae, which is literally damn the memory, which is it when you're taking down the some of these because the memories are not things that we want to perpetuate, or they incite trauma in people who go by them or see them. I actually wanted them to leave this monument up with the head off. That was my personal preference to the whole thing. But certainly there are other ways that people have been dealing with this. And there's been several across this country of Columbus. And I have to admit, I laugh every time I see that a Columbus statue got destroyed. But another example of this, so the one in the upper left was actually before the BLM protest this year. So this is You'll see the information is down here. This is in St. Louis in Forest Park in 2017 with the graffiti and racism on it. The other three are from the same monument from 2020, which is in Richmond, Virginia. It's a famous image that a lot of people have seen. I always like the projections onto monuments. I think it's a fantastic form of protest. You see it again on buildings and things like that, but you see the pride flag as well as BLM here. I think this image of the Black ballerinas is just a stunning image. This idea of creating art on top of this particular monument, I think is a fascinating example. So both the inciting of trauma by these monuments and also perhaps the healing of trauma by taking them down or putting graffiti or turning it into other art or something along those lines. So there's definitely things to consider. Not, however, a modern thing. We've been doing this for generations, which is why we have a phrase for it. So this is one of my examples that I like to use from Egypt, which is of Akhenaten. If you don't know about Akhenaten, he was the pharaoh who wanted to change Egypt into a monotheistic culture, to put Aten as the main god. And after his reign, they did everything they could to destroy his legacy and memory. These were deliberately defaced and deliberate. This is a head that's been cut off, just like the Christopher Columbus head was cut off. And this is defaced as well, to remove him in particular from memory, and to change what he had put into place. So again, this isn't the first time we've been doing these sort of things. But on a happy note, we can also heal through cultural heritage. And again, this is not a modern concept. So the one in the left-hand corner is actually one of what's called the Eleanor Crosses.
What can you what?
Somebody has their mic on. There we go. So what are the Eleanor Crosses? These were created. So the Queen of England died. Eleanor of Castile. She died. She was a beloved queen, particularly of the king, and she created a series of crosses that followed where her path of where her body was taken back to London. And they were considered to be places to go as a source of healing because of not because of that, as well as just grief in general, to be able to go there. So it's really this is her tomb in Lincoln Cathedral right here. For those of you again in Massachusetts, this one's probably a little more familiar to you. The Boston Marathon bombings. We now have a memorial to them, to the victims at Boylston Street. And this is the new monument. This is where they're putting it together. The sculptor, really, he's a very interesting person. If you read about the sculptor, he had some very interesting ideas about what he wanted to accomplish with this. And actually at the base of it, it says, "Let us climb now the road to hope." The idea that this monument can give hope to people and to heal such a traumatic event like the marathon bombings. So what I have here, are the essential question is, if people have died to protect cultural heritage, if it is one of the first targets in times of war, if it is protected by international law, and we didn't talk about that a lot, but you can get into all of the law, all kinds of law, international law about cultural heritage and what you can and cannot destroy and all of the things that go along with that. And if it inspires important questions, then is the study of cultural heritage inherently significant? And that's where the projects that I work with my students, really, that's where the essential question comes from. What we study, if all of these things are true, then what we are studying and what we are doing here is inherently significant, which I think is a way to get into the subject material. So this brings us to the project that I really want to talk about today, which is the project I started in 2017 called Cultural Heritage Through Image. This is a project that started out of basically the idea that I'm an amateur photographer, and I travel, well, when I could travel, I traveled quite a bit, and it dawned on me that what I was looking at looking at cultural heritage, that I was looking at it through the lens, I was looking at it through an expert's eye, and I was seeing perhaps some things that were different. And I was seeing some things that of how of the kind of the connections and some things that were coming out of this cultural heritage that might be a little bit different than somebody else visiting these sites. And so I brought it to the classroom. And the real focus of this project is the idea of paralleling and linking ancient to medieval cultural heritage stories with local cultural heritage stories. And in my case, that's New England, but this really can be anywhere. And the real is, and getting students to realize that cultural heritage gives us universal thoughts about heritage, about people, across time and geography. That they may look, the heritage may look different, the pieces may seem different, the art style may be different, or anything along those lines, but the universal messages, the overarching themes can be connected. And so what my students typically do is we take one piece of ancient and medieval cultural heritage and one piece of local heritage and see where those connections exist. And we bring the images into place to be able to show those parallels perhaps even more distinctly and more visually. So now I'm going to ask you the thing that I asked you to look at before. What did you notice about the use and juxtaposition of previous images in this presentation? Did anything stand out to you about the images? There's often a present connect. Yeah. I was trying to give you things like a tweet, trying to give you things like that do show how images are showing up. We're looking up at the images. Oh, the idea, especially the monuments, I think in particular, we have this sense of the scope, right? Cathedrals are that way for medievalists. How to get across what cathedrals actually make us feel in a photo is very, very complicated. Theme across time and place. The idea of beheading, yeah, actually, and you know what? I hadn't actually even thought about that till I was talking about it. Was this idea that of when cutting the head off a monument, right? And what that actually entails and what that actually means. Yep. I give you here an image, and again, I just added this morning. It was amazing this morning. I woke up and there were like 3 things that I needed to add to the presentation. This was a Facebook post from the Pan-African Historical Museum in Massachusetts. And as you can tell, it's Barack Obama, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Malcolm X. And the question is what's the first word that comes to mind when you look at this photo? And it reminded me again of what we were talking about here. What do images convey and how do they convey it? And this particular one leads me directly into the first example from the project that I wanted to show you. So there's different ways that students can interact with this and tell the story, right, about their connection that they have made between 2 objects. I had a student who was incredibly creative, student of color. We were doing the Nubian collection at the Museum of Fine Arts was our ancient piece that we were working with. And then they had to pick from that. And then they were also picking then a local piece to bring together. And she picked this Nubian mirror that you see here. And she then paired it with Martin Luther King Jr. And when she first came to me with this, I was like, I'm open to this. I don't know where you're headed, but I'm open to it. And she created a really powerful creating, and I only gave you a very small piece of it here, about her as an African-American woman looking in a mirror from the past. And what does she see? Who's looking back at her? Is it Dr. King? What kind of representation of herself does she see in this mirror? The full entry, I gave you the link to the full entry up here. It's short, but it's a very powerful statement of, again, in a very creative way to think about how this mirror and Dr. King, how this works together, right? And she really brought it together in a very creative statement. So that's one way kind of to approach how to look at these themes and how to bring them together. And then I'm going to show you the opposite side of that with another example of another student who chose a Nubian sandal from the MFA collection. And she went very physical. It was a physical, so that she was thinking physical object, and she discovered that in Lynn, Massachusetts, a man by the name of Jan Matzeliger, who was a man of African descent, he created what was called the shoe laster. That became a very important product for the production of shoes. And so she paired this Nubian sandal, and then this is a photo of mine of the gravestone of Jan Matzeliger, very clearly with the word inventor on it, which I think is a very, this idea of very important for the identity of an African American, right? To have that moniker right there from 1852 to this is the 1800s that we're talking about here. And she created this really idea of the talent and artistic skills of shoemaking across this long generation, this long time period, right? So again, I get chills when my students come up with these, because they come up with things I wouldn't have come up with in a million years. Like, I would never have thought of that one, and she found it and she ran with it. And it was a really fantastic pairing. So these are the kinds of ideas I'm talking about. But again, students go in very different ways. They can go very creative, or they can go very, very physical and very, very literal in some way. So there's different directions that students go with these. The project has done a number of exhibitions, and the big one that we have right now, it's the biggest one that we have, is a disability heritage from the medieval to the local. All of these are links. You can see each of the exhibitions. This one has about 75 artifacts in it, and more being added this particular semester as more of my students work on this. So it's really quite something. They've created I'm just very proud of them for what they've done. More pertinent to this particular talk is we started one on Africans and African Americans. That was a mini exhibition that was exhibited at the African Festival. And I had to look the date up because it was last year and it feels like it was like 3 years ago. But there was a fantastic experience where we had a tent there and had the picture frames with both the pictures as well as the stories that students created to put those two together. Both of the ones that I just showed you were a part of that exhibit. We've done a Scandinavian one at the Scandinavian Center here in Massachusetts. We've done one on women and gender. And we've done a more general one that didn't have necessarily a theme. And we've done 2 or 3 of those as well. But I think what's really important is that students get to see their work out there and up, both digitally in some cases, but also physically, that they're in museums. We did one at the Fitchburg Art Museum. We did one at Hammond Castle. It's very important to get that kind of recognition for the work that they are doing. So getting started, and this is where kind of moving into how to put this into your classrooms. Personal cultural heritage is an excellent place to start when it comes to this type of project. Rather like we were kind of talking about earlier with your own personal definitions of what it is, personal cultural heritage can really provide an excellent into this. The way that I do this is I have participants create playing cards with their heritage on them. And the inspiration for this were these playing cards, and I've given you some links here. So there were some archaeologists, James Ealer and Laurie Rush, who worked for the US military, who created cultural heritage playing card sets for soldiers in the military. And they were there to help soldiers figure out what they were looking at, because they were specific to the regions of the world they were in, and what cultural heritage is, why it's important, what you should do if you see cultural heritage that's on danger of being destroyed. All of these sorts of things to help soldiers think about cultural heritage as they're going about their lives and their duties. So why playing cards? Playing cards have been a really important teaching tool for a very long time. You might remember World War II, they would do plane spotting cards, playing card sets for people to know which planes that they were seeing in the sky. it's a great way to learn while you're just simply sitting around playing a game, right? You're reading the cards. It's a great kind of low stakes way to get information across to people, and they're easy to carry around. All of these sorts of things. So it's a really great project. And one of the things that I like to do is have either participants or my students create playing cards. And you can do this in any number of ways, but we'll start with personal heritage. So when we did the Boys and Girls Club workshops, we had them do this exercise, and some of them created, I mean, again, we didn't give them a lot of time, so the artistic value is not possibly the best it could be, but we just, you know, gave them, we'd already done some other work with them on cultural heritage and definitions, and they came up with their own things. So we're talking, they came up with music, and music is related to them. They came up with values of their family, and what values they believed were part of their heritage. Holidays, very big one. That was one of the first ones they came up with, were holidays. Traditions seem to create that for them. Languages. We had several students that spoke multiple languages in the class, which was fantastic. And they brought up that idea about learning the language and what that might mean. Food was a very big one. It also might not have helped that we were close to dinner time while we were doing these workshops. But the idea of food from their heritage that were specific to their heritage was very important to them as well. And then things like textiles. We had one student who, you know, African cloth worn by women, and gave us kind of an image of that. And the idea of the clothing that is culturally specific, right? And there was a lot more cards than these, but these are the ones that kind of stood out. Those are some great. So these, the idea of the playing card can be used in a lot of different ways. It could be a one-off in class where you just have them do kind of what you just did very quickly. But it also is something that you could do as a long term. They could create an entire set of playing cards, which I've done with my students. And this is kind of it's just a video, a compilation of some of the work that they put together in my world literature class. And as a class, we decided what the suits would stand for, what the categories the suits would be. We talked it out and hashed it out. And then they, throughout the semester, from the works that we were reading at the semester, then added to their playing cards until they had an entire set of playing cards by the end of the semester. So it really is kind of it's an interesting tool to be used in a variety of different fashions. So you know, some of them really got into it and put backs on the cards, and you know, did all that sort of thing. So your students can get very creative with it. They can you know, they can also do it very artistically, or they can just do it with word. I mean, it really, there's a lot of different ways to be able to use this particular assignment for that. So and again, this is a world literature class that I did this. Another thought is that you can have them provide images or photos of their personal cultural heritage, kind of like the Jamboard, which was a great suggestion as well, but can be displayed in a variety of ways. So there's especially digitally, there's all kinds of ways to do that digitally these days. So it's a thing that has a history, and you can really set it within this idea of the cultural heritage playing cards that the military created for a while, which, by the way, the Netherlands also has done that, as well as a couple of other. I sent away for the cards. I have like different sets of playing cards from different parts of the world. Different national parks around the country have done this as well. So there's different examples that you can provide with it. It's very set within the literature. And this kind of assignment is to, you know, to think about what's around you all the time that connects to this cultural heritage that may be ancient, but it's still relevant, right? It's still significant to our world and what exists around us. And again, personal heritage. I like, Sarah, how you were talking about bringing in students, right, who have those connections, and to be able to make that connection for people. So bringing in the personal heritage along with the ancient and medieval cultural heritage, along with all of that, I think that's a perfect example of what we're just talking about right there. The presentation that I gave you has these links, and these are all exhibitions that are happening now. And Tim highlighted the Black Monuments Matter exhibit at the Met, which is still going, I think, until November, if you can physically get there at this point. But so these are exhibits where students can pull. They're fantastic resources for being able to, in one place, finding all of these really fascinating pieces of cultural heritage all together. All right. So what I was talking about were those 3 exhibits in the center here. As I was saying here, that's what I meant, and those 3 exhibits that are in the center of that particular slide on the presentation. So they're wonderful, wonderful resources. I just do want to highlight that there's many ways that you can use this project. I use it for a semester-long project in my classes, where I have students think about the literature that we're studying with heritage, that a piece of classical or ancient to medieval heritage with a piece of local cultural heritage, to triangulate into an exhibition note focus, and then they do a researched exhibition note for the cultural heritage through image project, and that's what those links that I was showing you were from. As again, I do my own photography. I know somebody asked about image and the rights to those images. And one of the reasons that I use my own photography is because I have the rights to those images. So it's a lot easier for me to be able to handle, but I also do go through different museums and get the rights to use. A lot of places are open digital right now, so you can use theirs for educational purposes, especially. But I've gotten permissions from MFA, from the Perkins, from different places. They're usually pretty good about helping with educational projects, depending on what they are. So these are ones that that students have used in class for a variety of purposes. One was Canterbury Tales Connected. One was the Old English text Judith. One was a old Icelandic text that they used these pieces with. Another way to talk about this is actually how to describe visual resources. And I just want to put this in here. Again, as a disability studies scholar, this Describing Visual Resources Toolkit is also all about creating accessible descriptions, of images. And it's another way to connect to students' identity through disability as well. And so this particular toolkit that's linked here really does give a lot of information, and these are the basic principles of creating an accessible description. And I also use The Art of Seeing from Toledo Museum of Art. This one's a slightly more complicated one, so it might be better for older students. The accessible description actually could be used for quite a range of ages. Again, I'll give you the link again to this presentation, but I give you a whole bunch of resources for pre-modern African cultural heritage, including those exhibitions that I was talking about earlier, as well as some other things. For those of you who are in New England, these are resources for Black New England cultural heritage that can be used to help students find pairings for their cultural heritage. So these are really great resources for all of those things. Wherever you are, you certainly can find local examples of this as well. Just to talk about a couple of the images that I used earlier that I didn't talk about. So I had one of the Black Madonna from Chartres Cathedral earlier. This is actually in the project. It's paired with the Black Madonna on the right from Clinton, Massachusetts. And the other Madonna here that's actually a Black Madonna in Magdeburg Cathedral, but has been cleaned, which so has the one at Chartres Cathedral, has been cleaned and is now bright white. So these are things that you can talk about as well, the changes to cultural heritage that exist in these spaces. This is an exhibition at Artivism that is a Black Lives Matter exhibition that I actually have a photo in. That's the medieval African Saint Maurice. So the idea of putting medieval African cultural heritage next to the Black Lives Matter movement is really exciting and interesting too. And just briefly, the disability studies, the disability heritage. This was the image that was on the flyer, which is actually a Pushu Gwenaji from Cameroon and Chad. There's not a lot of study on it yet. I'm hoping for more studies to come out, but the basic concept is the idea is of putting the bad energies, the mental health issues into this figure to be able to deal with them and to process them into all of these sorts of things. So how mental health is dealt with in different cultures is a very interesting one. These are different artifacts that are in that exhibition that relate to mental health, both medieval as well as a couple of African, and we have some on local campus, as well as one from the Fitchburg Historical Society. So how to represent the invisible disabilities like mental health in these kind of spaces is very interesting. And there's just some more links there, including the link to the course that Elsa was talking about earlier. I'm going to be teaching it in January, so hope to see some of you there. But there's also some images or some other resources there for you as well. So thank you, everybody. Again, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. I'm also happy to do those guest presentations or guest talks for schools as well, or work on a project. If you're interested in doing an exhibition for this project, you're having your students do an exhibition for the project, more than happy to work with you on that as well.